Hello, I'm the Dark Master, and welcome back to the Kirby Right Back at Your Retrospective. In today's installment of the Kirby Right Back at Your Retrospective, we shall be reviewing episode 83, Teacher's Threat, or as it's called in the Japanese original airing, Monster Teacher 3! This episode was originally released in Japan on May 24th, 2003 as the 83rd episode, while the English dub done by the infamous company 4Kids was released on North America on December 4th, 2004, also as the 83rd episode. As you can tell by the 3 in the Japanese name, it is the third episode in a sort of informal trilogy inspired by the flaws of the public educational system of Japan. The previous two being episode 58, Enemy Elementary, and episode 67, The School Scam, which I've reviewed both in the past if you'd like to learn more. Also, the English name Teacher's Threat is an allusion to the common phrase teacher's pet, which alludes to a student that has special favor of a particular teacher. This repetition in theme has drawn ire from the fan base, but is it really all that bad? After all, numerous episodes have covered broadly environmental themes that nonetheless stand out. Let us find out for ourselves by starting the review proper with that story. The episode opens to a recap of the events of the last two school episodes that I mentioned before. If I was a more shameless YouTuber, I would go on about how you can watch those episode reviews if you'd like to learn more, but I already did that, so let's instead just continue on with the story itself. I have to say here, we also see the first change between versions, as in the English dub, unlike the Japanese original, the flashbacks have these sort of whitish borders, which, while not much, does make this blatant footage reuse more palatable and makes it less obvious. As you see Dedede recount how they were schemes to teach Kirby a painful lesson and failed because he's still living. We see the king standing on the balcony, lamenting his failures as he bursts out crying. Escargoon snarkily agrees, however. The king postulates, in a rare case of self-awareness, that the biggest issue was not the school, but actually himself. The sniveling snail agrees, saying that he knew that, as the king in turn yells at him to be quiet and listen. He says that he'll have to face the fact and get some education himself. Escargoon sardonically points out that education wouldn't do him all that good, as while a mind is a terrible thing to waste, you actually have to have a mind to waste in the first place. Dedede, in turn, in anger, hits him over the head with a hammer. What he says next is where we see the next change between versions. In the Japanese original, the king says they'll be good students to set an example for his citizens, which is oddly considerate for them. The English dub has him instead say that now he'll get the learning so that he can figure out a way to get rid of Kirby. Far more in character, but I do admit I like the Japanese one here a little better, for it slightly being a bit more deep. We then cut to the jazzy intro. After the jazzy intro, we cut to the outside of the castle Dedede, where Dedede calls up the enemy sales guy and asks for a new schoolhouse. The enemy sales guy explains he'd love to send one over, but they still haven't paid for the last one. Escargoon complains that the last one they bought went up in smoke, with the king saying that he ordered a schoolhouse, not a smokehouse. The enemy sales guy apologizes for this, and the king offers to pay triple the price if they send one over, and the sales guy agrees. We then cut outside that day as the air appears to be a shower, as Tiff and the others are forced beneath a tree to avoid the rain, interrupting a math lesson. Tiff, noting how bad it is, and suggests that they continue the lesson beneath the tree. Tuff whines that they should just go home. To Corey, the wretched bird suggests that all they are learning is how to get soggy. Tiff announces that a little rain won't stop them from learning. An unknown voice, however, tells them that's a good idea and a good, position to have as we are introduced to the character of the week, Mr. Chip, who, let us talk about him now for a bit. Mr. Chip, in terms of design, kind of looks to be the same race as Tiff and her family, albeit, maybe a little more rotund. His hairstyle and clothing reminds me of David Tennant's 10th Doctor, which, man, remember when that first came out? In reality, however, he's actually meant to be an allusion to the 1934 novella Goodbye, Mr. Chips, written by the British-American author James Hilton, which is about a mediocre but good-natured schoolteacher, Mr. Chipping. I haven't read it, but I appreciate the fact that the Kirby Right Back anime introduced me to such a high work of British-American literature. His Japanese voice is done by the voice actor Shigeru Nakahara, who also voiced Andrew 17 from the Dragon Ball series. And he does a fine enough job, but I must admit that I prefer the English voice done by David Lapkin, who also does Cerebrum, Dr. Yubui in this anime, as well as Mr. Four from One Piece. Formerly, he does an amazingly British performance, and overall, Mr. Chip is a solid character. Also, for some reason, the Japanese original, he is often called a hobo or unemployed. 4Kids removed this for some reason, and it's just kind of silly. I mean, hobos are not a harmful concept to children. Resuming with the plot, he explains that it is nothing much more than a short-lasting sun shower, a real-life phenomenon, shockingly enough, where it rains while the sun is shining. And as he predicts, it ends rather quickly, to the shock of the group. Tiff asks who he is, as he's new around here, and Mr. Chip introduces himself as a teacher. Tiff is amazed, while Tuff says it's too bad, as Cappytown has no school. Mr. Chip says he must be mistaken then and come to the wrong town. Tiff encourages him that he'll find employment soon, as Iroh explains that Tiff teaches them stuff. Honey points out that the sun has returned as Mr. Chip said it would. Tuff points out a rainbow, and all of this is cut short by the ringing of bells. The group walk over and, via a cleverly used camera pan on a rainbow to cover up a cut, come upon the rebuilt Dedede Academy. Mr. Chip remarks the legend of a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow is true, though I guess the gold is metaphorical here. Tiff is confused as her brother says it wasn't there earlier. We then see a crowd of townsfolk arrive as Escargoon and Dedede announce the new school and that they will not be handling administration at all, likely to avoid trust issues. Professor Curie asks then who the principal is, and the king in turn makes him one. Shocking him, and Escargoon then makes the mayor the vice principal and asks if he says yes. The mayor hesitates as Curio points out that without a teacher, it's pointless to have any sort of administration in the first place. Escargoon suggests Tiff as the king mockingly says that she has the right, mean, know-it-all personality to be one. Tiff declines and suggests instead that a nice man is the real deal and can do the job better. The king asks who this nice man is as Tiff introduces Mr. Chip, who blushes as Mabel is really out of pocket, saying that she finds him attractive, much to the depression of Samo the bartender, who is concerned. Curio posits that he seems very scholarly, and Mr. Chip assures them that he has a degree in education and can do his best to help them. Tiff and Tuff compliment him for being nice, as she says he cares about education, something the king knows nothing about. To which Dedede agrees nonchalantly before saying that He's just a student like the rest of them are, which shocks the crowd as Tough in disbelief asks why he'd want to be a student as he is a king. To Corey, the loathsome swallow, in a rare instance of intelligence, points out that the only thing he'll learn is how stupid he is. Asgargoon tells the putrid poultry to be quiet, as the king says that while he may not be the sharpest hook in the tackle box, he can only get smarter, pointing out how he's not the only dullard in the town. Kawasaki then asks if he can also be a student. Mr. Chip says sure, but asks what he'd like to learn. Kawasaki answers to cook, as Tough, who expected some corny joke, grabs his head, while Tiff points out obviously that this school has nothing to do with cooking. Kawasaki says that's fine, as his cooking has little to do with cooking, which horrifies the crowd, which doesn't discourage him in the slightest, as Tiff asks if Kawasaki can join, and Mr. Chip agrees as long as he, stays in the classroom and not in the lunchroom, as the chef is just happy to be accepted. We also see the next change between versions, as in the Japanese original, instead of asking what he wants to learn, Mr. Chip asks Kawasaki what 3 plus 3 is. Kawasaki answers 33. Tough is astounded that he doesn't know math, while Tiff asks how he's been calculating change, to which he answers that it's easier to shortchange people when he doesn't know. The crowd is appalled at this, as he immediately backtracks, claiming that it's a joke, bro. Honestly, both versions here are pretty solid, but my preference is the Japanese original. We see class start, as we also see the next change between versions. In the Japanese original, we hear the kids sing the Dedede Academy theme song, which is a parody of the Ogeba Totoshi, which was an old song once often sung at a lot of Japanese graduation ceremonies that's declined in recent years due to social change. The English dub only plays the organs of the anthem, which is weird, and I have no reason why they did it. It only weakens the scene and makes it less consistent with past episodes. Mr. Chip welcomes the students for their first day and performs a roll call. He calls Tiff, Tough, and Spikehead, who all answer easily. But when he calls upon Dedede, the king is greatly upset that he's not called King Dedede, as Escargoon points out how he's royalty, to which Mr. Chip apologizes but says that in his classroom there is no class and he treats everyone the same, and asks the king to try again, and the king admittedly does so in a rather rude way. Before Mr. Chip calls upon Escargoon and then Kawasaki, who both answer. He calls upon the horrible board to Corey, who, yos at him. And lastly, Kirby is called upon, who answers Poyo. This causes everyone to laugh, as Escargoon callously accuses him of attempting to disrupt the class, as the king says Kirby should be punished by Mr. Chip, as he didn't answer correctly, and Mr. Chip plays it off and says that he's trying his best. Tiff rubs it in by saying that he's very forgiving, to which Escargoon and Dedede then do the most obnoxious taunt in the series, if not animation period, with the two calling teacher's pet. Mr. Chip tries to get them to stop by saying Kirby has done nothing wrong. Dedede then decides to start mocking Kirby by saying Poyo Poyo, and Escargoon pokes Kirby with a pencil. This goes on for a bit as Tiff is disappointed in Kirby's behavior. Mr. Chip calls on Dedede to write his initials, which he struggles with, and Tough mocks his incredible stupidity before Mr. Chip offers to show him and draws a letter D on the blackboard. Dedede goes up and with his arrogance draws a 0 or O, which Tough and others laugh at. The king is confused, and Mr. Chip explains the straight line makes the D a D. The king fails to see the difference, as Honey asks if the straight line being made round changes it into an O. Mr. Chip confirms this, and the king, plus Escargoon do that annoying chant I talked about earlier. Mr. Chip tells everyone to calm down as it's math time, which concerns the king as he's bad at that, causing the other students to laugh at him. Mr. Chip offers him some basic math equations and the king walks up and challenges Kirby to answer them. Kirby, being a baby, can't answer as Escargoon pokes him with a pencil several times. Kirby keeps getting prodded until Tiff notices and physically confronts Escargoon, attacking him. Mr. Chip breaks it up and tells her to stop. She then explains how Escargoon was bullying Kirby, but Mr. Chip says he knows and Escargoon will be staying after school as punishment. He and Dedede then sing that obnoxious teacher's pet taunt as Tiff is exasperated and Kirby is just confused at what's going on. We then see Mr. Chip do a little light experiment where he puts up a sphere and a flashlight. Dedede disrupts the class with a childish stunt, and Escargoon shows off his fancy flashlight, but Mr. Chip says that it's not show and tell and that they're being disruptive again. He explains light and shadows. Iroh points out how light interacts with a mirror, as Honey says that he's smart, and the teacher foolishly listens to Takori's suggestion to show how off this relationship. Honey asks if this is why her face shows up in the mirror, and the teacher points out that that is correct. We then see the next change between versions as Dedede says something. In the Japanese original, he asks why doesn't light hurt, and Mr. Chip explains that it's cause light isn't a physical thing. Escargoon tries to counter that if one sunbathes too much, according to the king, they get hurt. In turn, Iroh points out how he's a dummy. Honey says that that is a sunburn, which Spikehead continues saying is completely different. Meanwhile, in the English dub, we have Escargoon say that he's implying that the king is dense, while the king gets annoyed. Iroh says that everyone is smarter than the king, with Honey advising that he should listen and not talk, and the Spikehead scene is completely removed. While the dialogue changes aren't a big deal, the removal of Spikehead's scene is a bit sad, as it only hurts it. Dedede and Escargoon call the two teachers pets as we see Dedede fling the flashlight at poor Mr. Chip, and Dedede makes a snarky remark, which is where we see the next change between versions. In the Japanese original, he says that it hurts when light hits you. Meanwhile, in the English dub, it has him smirkily respond by claiming that light hit him, not the king. Both versions are fine enough in their petulance. Tiff, enraged, leaps into the air and starts pummeling the king. The awful Bert Takori exit Orn as Tough starts attacking Escargoon as well. We then cut to Mr. Chip being taken to Dr. Ibui's doctor office by the kids, Professor Curio, and the mayor. He's looking at a scan of the king's head that he somehow got access to, and we see him make an observation where we see the next change between versions. In the Japanese original, he postulates that Dedede may have had a childhood head trauma, explaining his behavior and low attention span. Meanwhile, in the English dub, we see him point out a part of the king's skull is hollow. In either version, it sort of comes to the end conclusion that the king is mentally disabled, which I don't really have anything to say outside of that explains so much. Dr. Ibu says he shouldn't worry so much about the king as Professor Kier says his own health is far more important, with the mayor advising him to rest. Mr. Chip, however, says he is feeling fine and says he has so much work to do in order to improve Dedede as a student, which amazes Tiff, who is seemingly astounded by the guy's dedication as a teacher. Kirby is just confused as we then cut to Kawasaki serving lunch. Dedede is rightfully disgusted, and Escargoon tosses food at the guy's face, which eventually escalates into a massive food fight with everyone throwing food everywhere. Mr. Chip enters into the room and is confused at the sound, only to get hit in the head with Kawasaki's awful food, while Tiff looks on in contempt. Kirby, however, just happy for more food. We then cut to the next school day as a week has passed and Mr. Chip has prepared a test for everyone to take. Dedede asks if it's going to be hard, clearly concerned. He answers that some will find it hard, while others will find it easy. Escargoon complains on the king's behalf, which sees him say tests only exist to make people feel stupid. Mr. Chip, however, assures them that it's just to help them check to see if they remember, and is nothing to fret about, to which Iroh points out might not be true for someone as stupid as Dedede. Tough says he'd like to see him pass one, but Tiff tells him off to knock it off, as the king could start going off again, and that could lead to issues. Iroh, Honey, and Escargoon comment on how easy it is, with Escargoon chuckling. The king and Kirby, however, really struggle. Escargoon after working a bit, catches Dedede cheating on him, and for once in his life grows a backbone and calls him out and tells the teacher that he is cheating. And Mr. Chip calls the king out, saying that he'll have to learn to think for himself and that cheating is against the rules here. Dedede is annoyed at Escargoon for ratting him out, clearly. We cut to later as you see Chip has graded these tests. After a tense pause with everyone looking at him, he says everyone has passed, which makes everyone happy, though the petulant Bert Decoy asks how it's possible Kirby could have passed this. Mr. Chip goes on to start a new lesson, but a random gust of wind sees the tests spread to the class. Dedede's tests gets caught by Kawasaki, who got hit in the head with it, and says that all the answers are wrong. Iroh looks at Kirby, saying it's bad, which the crew of Takora uses as an excuse to mock Kirby, and the whole entire class makes fun of Dedede. The king accuses Mr. Chip of trying to make him look bad, as Mr. Chip tries to explain what happened, but the king leaves in his limousine. Tiff asks the sad-didn't teacher why he doesn't punish the king for misbehaving, to which Mr. Chip explains that it's because all the king needs is encouragement, and punishing him won't really work. The school day ends as Tiff says Mr. Chip is a really great teacher. He says something which is where we see the next change between versions. In the Japanese original, he explains that while all his colleagues went on to become university professors at top universities, but he didn't want to become so elitist and instead loves teaching kids, explaining education is needed in disadvantaged areas. The English dub has him explain that Capitan reminds him of the little village he grew up in, and after Tiff asks if it's far away, he admits it's not, but he hasn't visited in some time due to following his dreams, and that he's happy to help make children get a positive improvement in their lives. Honestly, both versions convey his character really well, so I can't really say which is better. In both versions, Tiff says that if more people were like him, the world would be a better place, and that he is a perfect teacher. Mr. Chip, utterly bamboozled, tries to tell her something, but she leaves, and he looks strangely saddened about something that he's not telling them. We cut to that night as Tiff looks out on the fountain as she's just thinking about stuff. And as she does so, Meta Knight shows up as we see the next change between versions. In the Japanese original, he hopes that Mr. Chip has success. Meanwhile, in the English dub, he doubts Mr. Chip's sincerity, and I think the English dub here is superior due to the foreshadowing it implements, as honestly, his inclusion in the Japanese original comes off as unnecessary. Tiff in both versions looks up in the moon and sees Mr. Chip in it. Dazzling. We cut to the morning where an alarm goes off, which Dedede deactivates it, desiring to sleep in. Escargoon goes to wake him up and saying he'll be late for school. Then Dedede says that his classmates will just laugh at him, so there's no point in going. Escargoon tries to say that they also laugh at Kirby. The king gets annoyed as Enemy failed his idea, and then he calls up the enemy sales guy, who is concerned when Dedede explains the problem, asking if the teacher they send is not living up to their promise. This confuses the king, who asks if Mr. Chip is a real monster. The enemy sales guy explains that technically no, as they just sort of hired him before asking if he's attacked Kirby yet. The enemy sales guy is informed by the king that no, of course he hasn't, and then the enemy sales guy promises to send over a good teacher monster to make up for this. We then cut to class as Mr. Chip greets everyone before asking where Dedede and Escargoon are. Iroh says they must be playing hooky, while Honey suggests that they must be tardy. He hopes not, but sadly then the king arrives and Mr. Chip is happy until the king reveals his secret, that he's a creature from Enemy. Tiff, of course, denies this, but the king says that she should just ask him about it. She goes over to him and asks if it's true. He sadly confirms, as he couldn't find a teaching job, so he had to sign a contract with the enemy. But when he got here, he couldn't harm all of these wonderful children. The king, with no sympathy, says it's time he gets a new job, and tosses a smoke bomb which summons the monster of the week, Reketsu. Let's talk about him now, as he's most relevant here and introduced. This vaguely humanoid fellow kind of looks like Coach Megwick from Home Movies if he was like a failed karate teacher. With suspicious red armband on one hand. I like the very cool bandana though. He doesn't really speak, more so just growls. That, in the Japanese original vaguely sound like bishi and bashi, a Japanese onomatopoeia for hitting things that are sadly go uncredited. Admittedly, he's one of the more forgettable monsters, definitely compared to the last two school episodes, but he's fine enough. He definitely conveys the aesthetic of an evil teacher. Resuming with the plot, his eyes glow and he pulls out a wooden sword and bashes a desk. There's another change between versions here, as in the Japanese original, Kawasaki flinches silently, while in the English dub added a voice of him going, "Oh," or, something. Not much of a change, but it's something to note, and I do think it is a slight improvement. He then begins beating the crud out of Kirby. The scene is a bit longer in the Japanese original, which is a shame as it getting removed only weakens the scene. Chip goes to stop him, but Reketsu bats him away with ease, despite the two being adults of roughly the same size. Tiff tells him to run, but Mr. Chip says it's his fault, as he has to take responsibility to protect students. The evil Reketsu bats Kirby through the window, and he himself goes through to chase after him to finish the job, but trips up and falls on his face, causing him to drop the sword, which Tiff tells Kirby to suck up, and he does so to become... Sword Kirby. I've talked in length about this guy in the last 5 episodes Sword Kirby showed up in. Those being Episode 3, Kirby's Dual Role, Episode 4, A Dark and Stormy Night, Episode 21, A Princess in Distress, Episode 26, Hour of the Wolf Wrath, and Episode 6, Crusade for the Blade. Normally I suggest going back and watching all of those, but a lot of those have, been wrongfully copyright striked because YouTube has no understanding of the concept of fair use, but just to keep it brief and avoid repetition, he made the transition into the anime well, and I don't really have any complaints about how Sword Kirby looks or behaves. Tough points out the obvious as Reketsu pulls out a lightsaber, which is amazing, and the two trade a few blows. The math teacher stretches his arms shockingly long, which is a kind of a random thing he can do, and the two eventually end up on the roof where they trade some more blows. Eventually, the two leap in the air. Kirby performs a sword slash, as you see the exchange between versions. As in the Japanese original, he cries out to the word sword beam every time he does, a sword beam attack. 4Kids remove this, and honestly, good, because the less he talks, the better, in terms of Kirby. Reketsu manages to block the first one, but Kirby does a second one, which cuts through the sword and cuts him in half, as we see the next change between versions. In the Japanese original, he is silent as he dies. In the English dub, however, he does one final groan of death, which makes the English dub here a bit better, and he falls into the school, blowing it up. It sends debris everywhere flying like the bell, as Dedede and Escargoon try to flee the scene of their actions. The king says, "Class is dismissed," as the bell falls on them. The king says this was a bad idea, with Escargoon giving him a D. We then see the crowd outside of the ruined school, where we see Mr. Chip saying goodbye, and his explanation is where we see the final change between versions. In the Japanese original, he says enemy is after him after breaking his contract, while the English dub removes this, causing him to just vaguely say that it's time he left. This was a great shame, as I really think it makes him leaving come off as just weird and kind of out of character. And honestly, just the English dub is better here. Tuff says that he'll miss him, as Mr. Chip promises to keep them in his heart. Tiff tears up with goodbye, saying that she won't forget him. This is notable for being one of the few times that Tiff actually cries. The other times being episode 67, The School Scam, and episode 40, Monster Management, both of which I've reviewed before. Mr. Chip says that has taught him a lot, and he waves goodbye as the episode ends with Kirby and the others waving goodbye as the sun sets. Now let's discuss the episode's positives, negatives, and my final thoughts. Starting with the positives, I like Mr. Chip. He's really a kind man, perhaps the paragon of what a teacher should be, trying his best to help students, even those like Dedede, which are, bad delinquents. And yeah, it should go without saying he never shows up again in the anime, which is to be expected given he shows up so late, but, you know, it's just a nice guy. Really solid one-off character. I only hope that enemy didn't kill him, which, maybe. Speaking of, I love how this episode shows adults can also be students. Something a lot of people often forget is that even as an adult, you can still learn stuff, and you can always expand your knowledge. I do that whenever I make nature videos. I love to read scientific papers, and I think that we often forget this. Plus, we make fun of people who go to school later in their life. The monster of the week is solid, if being a bit forgettable in terms of design. The fight against Sword Kirby, though, was very well done, and he was very competent, as he put up more of a fight than most do. Being the first and only to not get sliced in half with the first attack that, Kirby does. Speaking of Sword, this is the last appearance of it in the anime, which we shall be sadly seeing a lot of going forward as we reach the end of this, series. And did it go off with a bang? Well, the fight is solid and probably one of the most intensive in the series, but I will say that this is far from the best episode that Sword shows up in. And maybe one of the others could have shown up later in this place, but still, its inclusion is neat. As for negatives, I've seen a lot criticize this episode for having a repetitive theme, especially when you consider the past two school episodes. I disagree. For example, there are many environmental themed episodes which, while on a broad level are covering the same overarching theme, explore different subcategories of environmental issues like littering, hunting, deforestation, invasive species and tourists, whaling, and eco-tours and the problems they may cause. The school trilogy are similar in that while each of them do overall cover school as a broad theme, they do so differently. Like in the first episode, it was mainly about abusive teachers who were very strict. The second one was about really bad students, and the third one is about the struggles of good teachers, as well as, the desire to help people. And honestly, I think all three of them are equally good, though I will admit that I do personally find that this one might, on some level, be considered the weakest. Just in all honesty, public schooling is just trash. Private ones are way better, honestly. For me, however, the greatest issue are most of the changes, which unfortunately sort of weakens certain scenes of the episode, not to the point of lowering its grade or anything, but I really think removing the ending explanation as to why Mr. Chip leaves is just egregious and unnecessary. Overall, though, this is a good, solid episode that I think you should watch, especially if you're binging the whole series. While you could say that it's not top tier, it's definitely above average. Anyway, I'm the Dark Master, and if you like this video, liked it, and if you loved it, consider subscribing and sharing it around. It really helps out smaller YouTubers. And, take care, have a wonderful day, and don't forget to hang on, because tomorrow we will be re-uploading another older episode review that was taken down for BS copyright reasons. So, have a nice day.